Coming up today, we discuss USA full member ambitions, the ICC Chair race, and news around the world. But first, a shout out to those who support us on Patreon. From as little as $2 US a month as a patron, you can access bonus content and emerging cricket and have a say on the show's direction. To sign up, log on to Patreon. That's patreon.com/emerging cricket. Another cracking show this week. Let's go. Hello and welcome again to the Emerging Cricket Podcast online and on Sport FM in Perth. I'm Daniel Bezic, and with me around the Emerging Cricket table, I'm joined by the rest of the podcast crew. First to our media personality, Tim Cutler. Tim, how's things?
You did say you were going to say that beforehand. I'd hope you were joking. But, look, I've had better weeks, but onward and upward, as they say.
That's it.
How about you, sir? You sound a bit blocked up.
I'm a little bit clogged up. Just a bit of a head cold. We're all good. COVID-free once again. And yeah, I'll delegate a lot of the talking to you guys, hopefully, tonight, just to make sure that everyone sticks around and listens to the entirety of the podcast and before I get too annoying. So I do apologise in advance. Of course, we wouldn't be complete without Nick Skinner, better known as Copernicus Cricket on Twitter. Nick, how are you?
I'm very well. I'm up in Ballina on the New South Wales Northern Rivers area. Put in some of the show notes, sitting on the beach on a bit of driftwood for a chair, so that was nice.
Lovely part of the world. Can't say I've frequented it recently. Not far away from Tim, actually, all the way up there.
Yeah, well, I was thinking that, but of course I'm not allowed into Queensland, so I'm stuck on this side of the border.
Yeah, I think the bubble may have extended towards that, but that make it sounds like you're too close to Byron Bay, and what would Zac Efron do with all those Queenslanders coming down? So, yes, it is not far from me. You were definitely closer to me than you were. Decent old drive for you. That would have been a good sort of, 8 hours or whatnot north. So
yeah, about that, yeah.
You and Brooklyn definitely must like each other, so that's a plus.
Well, yes, we do. We do. She's up here for an art show. Yeah, dropped off the artwork earlier in the week and have been having a holiday since then, so that's nice.
Lovely. Look, this is the Emerging Cricket Variety Hour, and I'm your host, Tim Cutler, and Daniel Beswick is my guest. He won't be doing much talking because he's sick, but
good.
That was Nick, and is that okay, Daniel?
Go for it.
Yeah, I felt when I listened back after our chat last week, and I heard two kind of ads from us, I thought it actually did sound like we were selling cold brew coffee.
Well, if any cold brew coffee manufacturers are interested, I'm happy to be doing ads for them on the podcast.
Look, we're happy to take gifts.
Yeah, just pay us in coffee beans, honestly.
Yep, that should be a Patreon option. So, Daniel, why don't you tell me what you think about the USA's new strategy, because I'm intrigued. You read it cover to cover.
Yes, all 16 pages of it. Yes, for anyone who isn't aware, the USA launched their foundational plan from 2020 to 2030.
So you still want to host, basically, is what you're telling me.
The idea is that I ask the questions and the answers that you guys provide.
Oh, okay.
Is most of the show today. But no, I'm more than happy to talk and wax lyrical about associate cricket every week. Rain, hail or shine. Sick or healthy, doesn't really matter.
I thought that was my big chance there.
Yeah, don't get too uppity.
Again, like Nish last week, if you're keen on asking the questions down the track, I'm all for it. But yes, the USA have launched their foundational plan for 2020, aiming for full membership, a bold strategy by 2030. 5 key objectives: growing engagement, increasing participation levels, improving performance of national teams, operating sustainably, and building trust across the local community. There are so many different tangents we can go with this, but for me, it looks as if the USA have always been ambitious in what they've wanted to do with cricket. And, we could probably argue that the resources are there as well, especially at this point in time. The USA are a little bit different in that they've had to sort of work a lot of the time from the top down, from the national team and from the organisation all the way down and trickle down to the club level, whereas a lot of other countries have started with all of the clubs and building upwards. So, Nick, I want to bring you in first and ask you about this situation. Looking at it, how viable do you think a lot of this stuff can be?
Gee, well, I mean, I don't want to be too negative on them because I'd very much like for them to succeed. As much as it sort of pains me to say that as a Canadian fan, but the difficulty is we've sort of seen this all before. There's a lot of these targets are sort of recycled from the 2015 Project USA document, which was I think that was when the ICC was starting to get involved and try and hold their hand and put them back on the straight and narrow. And that document had them qualifying for the men's, women's, and under 19s Cricket World Cups in 2020, none of which obviously happened. So, yeah, it's sort of a bit of deja vu. I think the US as a whole is one of these places where it's the bright lights and the glittering of the dollar signs that all these administrators see, and they see the revenue that comes out of the US for ICC events, and they look at that and the participation numbers and thousands of clubs and tens of thousands of players, and that's all fine. But the problem is, as we've discussed in the past, most of these people in the US who like cricket are not very interested in US cricket. And in fact, a lot of them don't even know that there is a US cricket team. So, bringing those people on board or even expecting them to get on board, that's a lot more of a challenge. And so they sort of talk about it a little bit with fan engagement and then, some of this stuff about bringing clubs on board and building trust. But I'm not convinced, there's been a lot of failed attempts in the past. And so building trust is going to be difficult when, a lot of these people, if they're even aware of the USA board, they're aware of the fact that they've sort of made a lot of these promises before. So, wait and see, I guess.
The difference being now we have a board endorsed. Well, I guess USACA in the past were endorsed by the ICC in that, at times they were members of the ICC
At times.
when they weren't suspended. I'm just trying to get that straight in my head so it makes sense to everybody else. But now we have an ICC member that was set up by the ICC. The CEO is the former ICC COO, and for the first time ever, they have a broadcast partnership deal for a T20 league that is actually looking like they're paying the money they're promised and grounds are being built, etc. Look, we don't need to debate the merits of the minor league exhibitions that have gone on. I think they are what they were. They were sort of thrown together, and probably the production and whatnot wasn't to the levels that the investment in cricket deserved. But that's by the by. I think that on one hand, I think that the real struggle for USA cricket is it's going to be too centred around the minor and major leagues, because that's where all the money is going into for the exposure, and it's balancing that relationship with ACE. We're already seeing strains there in the fan community asking who are picking the teams and are players going to be available for USA selection if they don't take part in certain exhibition games, etc. And it's tough. You talk about sort of following the money. The money is going after T20 cricket at the moment in the US, and for everything else they're talking about, there's a real danger of going down a route where they become more like an NBA, where it's just a single league and it's not actually a national governing body. But on the other hand, you've got some amazing people working there, like we said, the former COO of the ICC, who should be well versed in dealing with highly complex environments, as you outlined, Nick, with everything that USA itself, and then the USA cricket community. It's, I don't know if there's a 5D chess, but that's pretty much it. We've talked a lot on the podcast about the disparate nature of the US cricketing community, and you said yourself that there are people out there that don't even know the USA have a cricket team, or even worse, those that are out there and don't care because to them it doesn't represent them and their league. So it's pulling that community together under that common banner, and we've talked a lot about. I found it interesting that T20 cricket is the focus, and I know I've seen a few people mention this, well, the lack of any mention of 4-day cricket whatsoever, and I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing in looking to the future and what it looks like. I think it's just more a question mark to say, what cricketers are being developed if there's no potential whatsoever of long format cricket if they want to be a full member. But it's a hard one, really, isn't it? Because where do you start? There's so many things that need to be done, and they don't have a bottomless pit of money to be putting against all of these projects. So where are the priorities going to come to, and is it going to be about building a highly successful T20 league and trying to fund cricket that way and using that as a reason why Major League becomes a focus, or are they really going to try and get that grassroots firing again by activating that volunteer army and going from the bottom up. Let's call it the Daniel Weston strategy of actually building local heroes. And, well, I guess they're already local heroes, but it's galvanising that local cricket community, which no administration in USA cricket's history has been able to do. So I'll be a little bit more positive in you that, I wish them all the luck, because of firing, you don't want them to do well, because you don't want them to keep beating your native Canada and to knock them out. But I think we can all agree that a firing USA would change the landscape of global cricket. And we've seen it written about already, about what money coming out of America would do to shift the power structures in global cricket. If that saw more globalization, then great. And then if countries see America doing it, then a lot of other sporting nations have followed in their footsteps as well, with certain leagues around the world in other sports. So, look, I think you said it, Bez. It's ambitious. It's a fat old document as well. If you're trying to read it and get a snapshot of what they're going to do, it's a tough one to get a snapshot, because there are so many things happening. And I fear, for the amount of funding that's going into the organisation at the moment, and the number of employees, i.e. not many, how they're going to do it all. Because if you don't have paid staff, you have to really fire up a volunteer army, and you only fire a volunteer army, as they talk about it there, it's about growing their stature in that cricketing community. So that's going to take time and effort itself. So there are a lot of things they need to look at, and it's going to be a huge challenge. But I think we can only say that we wish them all the best.
10 years is a long time in the context of international cricket and its governments, and it will be interesting to see eventually, when we do get to 2030 and we're all, much, much older, and hopefully still here talking about associate cricket, but maybe talking about a more associate teams performing excellently in global competitions and more opportunities. But it'll be interesting to see in 2030 what full membership actually looks like. There's already talk about the decoupling of test matches and the idea of full member status. So for the USA, again, a lot of their ambitions are in this 2020 to 2023 period. I think probably about 60% of their objectives are inside that first 3 years. So I think we'll actually know pretty soon how that's all going to go. But Tim, as you say, it's the importance of galvanizing all that local cricket and the heroes that pop up in local cricket, actually pushing the competition and the competitiveness of all the players higher up and into higher honours. Because I think, speaking to a couple of people involved and watching USA cricket either from afar or up close, there are a lot of big fish in small ponds in terms of players dominating local leagues. When we looked at it originally, the measuring our success and the 6 points, their first one being to grow engagement. I think for a lot of other countries, that would look a little bit odd, because I think a lot of people would be more interested in just getting their people to participate in the game. But I think for the USA and their unique situation of having people from so many other cricketing countries moving to the USA and growing up in the USA and having children in the USA, they don't really look to the USA national team. They're looking to their old country as the team that they support. So hopefully getting, all those people keen on a USA national team and unifying every single one there can be done. I know it's possible, and there's more than enough people, I think, for it to happen. It's just a case of just how they can, as you say, Tim, galvanize and unite everyone, to compete and ultimately push for the same goal.
It's easy to say it's complex and it's going to be hard, but it's not going to work if they don't get communities engaged. And yes, that's where one of our contributors is from, but look at Morrisville and the way that they've been able to build a community around there, getting, let's call it locals, inverted commas again. Thanks, everyone can't see me with the inverted commas, but really building a community around a great facility that can host international cricket and growing from there in terms of community engagement, coaching and development. This is all happening independent of USA Cricket's involvement. I mean, to the stretch that they're not out there putting staff into the schools. I think back to the challenges that Hong Kong had, of really finding it hard for people to recognise the sport, having space to play it and not having many players, and the more players you got, there weren't enough grounds. But then I look at we had staff that we were able to directly control and train and get them to also recruit volunteers and teachers and go into the schools themselves. And USA Cricket, they don't have 1,000 development staff out there going to schools across 50 states. They're having not hands off, a real arm's length. It's a further than arm's length. It's a go gadget arm's length to these development activities. But these associate nations are sometimes getting let's say the same amount of money, for argument's sake. Let's say that same $1 million that a country like Hong Kong would have been getting if they were in the same league to what USA is getting. How do you spread that money, let alone the cost of living somewhere? So the challenges are huge, and they're going to have to be finding income streams elsewhere, and that's how those academies have all popped up around America, because there's no national structure running development. So that's opened up the chances for private academies to run, but then trying to nationalize, that's the wrong perspective, but trying to bring academies sort of into a structure that all feeds the same way. And sometimes those academies are owned by your major shareholder in your T20 league, and they become sort of quasi hubs for that. It's a complex situation, I guess, and it's all, we're seeing a microcosm, if that's the right word, of that in Nepal, with Nepal coming back out from the suspension cold and having private academies and private leagues everywhere. How are they going to reintegrate into that cricketing system? But USA are even further down the line, because they've gone decades with an administration that didn't have control because of the sheer scale of the country. And so how to bring that all together into a pyramid that kind of leads to the best teams representing America and a single community. So, I think we could probably talk about a lot. That I think what they've tried to do is address all the challenges and come up with solutions. I just hope that they're able to prioritize and resource it, because the opportunity is huge.
Yeah, and just to finish up, I suppose the Olympics case can't hurt if the USA recognises cricket as part of its Olympic committee as well. So that's another thing to keep track of. And just to finish up, just looking at some of the immediate goals for the USA over the next 3 years: a national softball tournament, publishing long-term international playing calendars, bidding for future ICC events from 2024 to 2031. That's all in 2021 in the first half, and then looking at things like multiple major league venues, entry-level programs for school-level cricketers, increasing participation on the women's side of things, all leading up to the ultimate goal in 2030. So we'll be keeping a keen interest on that and following that progress as it unfolds. And looking to the ICC and the race for the chairman position, down to two once again, but not the two that we were potentially thinking it would be. Imran Khawaja against Greg Barclay of New Zealand. And looking at some of the press that has come out, a secret ballot and 2/3 majority will be the vote, will be good enough to take that role. Looking at this, Colin Graves officially ended his bid, according to multiple sources, yesterday. Looking at these two, it's Barclay versus Khawaja. Tim, who you got?
Well, we've endorsed a candidate, so I think we should probably stay with our horse here. But yeah, it's interesting that you talk about, quote unquote, cricket press, the mouthpiece of our largest member in world cricket has sort of put out a piece talking about the support behind each of the candidates, referring to Barclay as the quote-unquote consensus candidate because he has the support of the ICC full members, after already pointing out that Pakistan has hitched their wagon to Khawaja's candidacy. So, look, we do talk about administration and politics, or in terms of ICC politics a bit, so I don't think we should sort of stay on it too long, but apparently India, England, and I was trying to think of that other country that was part of the big three there, Australia, have this...
Oh, are they part of the... Oh, okay.
Yeah, I remember something about that, but I back New Zealand. But it sounds like, unnamed directors are backing, including the independent women's director, and Pakistan, and the associate directors at least are all behind Khawaja. So, already that sounds like to me New Zealand's Greg Barclay, who incidentally is also the chairman of the International Rugby League, which is an interesting point, which I'm sure we'll get to, is going to really struggle to have 2/3 of the votes. So I'm not sure what happens if there's an impasse and neither candidate has has enough votes and does it all, what will happen? Because it sounds like the Constitution doesn't prepare for this situation. We've seen some boards have dead heats. I think we saw that in Uganda, and they basically had to have a legal opinion and I don't think it went to court, but it definitely needed some lawyers' fees to revise the Constitution, or at least get a call as to what they do, because the votes don't change what happens, especially if they're two new candidates, as opposed to an incumbent being able to carry on. So, look, I think a Khawaja is still the best choice for global cricket, and I guess selfishly, and although he'll be an independent chair, that also maintains or increases the emerging cricket vote on that board. But we've talked about it before. It's not like Khawaja comes in and suddenly makes it a bigger World Cup or goes to a FIFA funding model, but someone who can potentially bring those sort of warring factions together for the good of the global game gets my vote. So I know Greg Barclay's a very, very effective board member as well, unassuming, not the loudest guy in the room, clever lawyer. He's been on the board of New Zealand Cricket for quite a while, chairman of New Zealand Cricket, and like we mentioned, chairman of International Rugby League as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think Shonak originally, one of our friends and contributors, originally brought this up. But being an executive for another sport is quite interesting. We've talked about the conflict of interest that might exist when you've got someone moving from one cricket board to the nominally independent chairmanship. What happens when you've got someone who's the chairman basically working for two competing sports? And I mean, I know rugby league isn't necessarily competing a whole lot with cricket, but it is, how can someone really dedicate themselves to this position and put in all the time and the energy and whatnot? And if your job as the chairman of the ICC is to make cricket as big and profitable as possible, and your job as the chairman of International Rugby League is to do the same thing for a different sport, I don't know. I don't feel 100% comfortable about that.
It's interesting, he came in earlier, or basically just pre-COVID, and he was interviewed talking about what rugby league, as opposed to rugby union, for anyone out there in the cricketing world that don't know the difference between the two, that the nines version of rugby league, down from the normal 13 people in the field, would have a similar potential to what T20 cricket would be. So it is interesting, funnily enough, seeing a sport with more teams in its World Cup, who has made some big moves to grow the game around changing eligibility criteria for World Cups and also looking at ways to grow. But yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it, that if he's using some of the cricket ideas for rugby league, is cricket going to be getting the best outlook? But I guess you could have said the same thing about him joining the International Rugby League board whilst he was still a director and chair of New Zealand Cricket. So, Australia, we've got the chairman of rugby leagues, also the chairman of the racing, turf racing. So, geez, you think sort of in a lot of countries, there's only one country in the world where leagues, it's national sport. We know that's PNG. Good trivia for everyone out there. Although they've probably heard us say it 15 times on here, so everyone would know that. But I guess it's a challenger sport like cricket in many places. And he's spoken about, finding places around the world, especially North America, Canada, California, he named about focuses for rugby league. It's going to be interesting to see how that sort of outlook, that expansive outlook, changes if he's sitting in the ICC seat.
Well, I mean, if he brings in the Rugby League World Cup format for cricket, I could see that being pretty good, actually. It's quite an interesting format, actually, in the way that they've seeded the weaker teams into two smaller groups, from which one team progresses from each group. So you've got two out of the six, so-called weaker teams going through. Whereas for the stronger sides, they've got two groups of four. So out of those, three are going through from each group to the next round. So basically, you've got your 8 quarterfinalists, but it's just a way of filtering out the weaker teams, which is quite interesting, without having a sort of patronising pre-qualifier to get them out before the main competition starts. So, yeah, I think that's something that they could actually look at. And, having 14 teams is, well, better than 10.
Just trying to do some quick math here. It's a 17-member ICC board, but Manu Sone can't vote. So 16 can cast votes. Is that correct, Tim?
Manu's a CEO and he sits ex officio. So he's not one of the 17. What you're looking at there is the fact that the chairman no longer sits on that board. So there's only so there's only 16 directors. So there are 12 at the moment. So I don't know whether Imran Khawaja gets 2 votes, one as his position as an associate director and also vice chair, but that vice chair is a nominal position on the board, and one as chairperson itself. So whether they're talking about getting a 2/3 majority of 17, and if Khawaja has 2 votes, wouldn't it be great if it all came down to his vote? I'm feeling like a Kevin Costner film. Like we've talked before we came on, we talked about the growth of American cricket, and we need someone to make a movie about building it from this diverse crowd and taking the world on. But I think we need a draft day. But it would be the ICC. But it would be the ICC elections, and it just ends up with, getting what we want. Imran Khawaja sitting atop his
Putney, get Putney.
Good crossover there from us. So yes, 17 votes, 2/3 majority, but there might only be 16 votes in the room. 12 full members, 3 associates, 1 independent female director, the independent chair, who I don't think is sitting there, and a partridge in a pear tree. It's like, and Tim Cutler, what is your subject on Mastermind? I can recite the board structures.
It's not The Simpsons seasons 1 to 10.
Well, that would be seasons 3 and 4, probably. I don't know.
The other interesting thing would be, I'm just thinking about South Africa. What happens if
that's
things go pear-shaped in South Africa and they don't have a vote?
Yeah.
Did the partridge in the pear tree lead you to saying pear-shaped? So is that something
probably? I don't know. Maybe.
That's another interesting one as well. The argument for a unnamed journalist, in inverted commas, for Times of India, did mention that South Africa's membership being a discussion point at the moment may dictate who they vote for, because they may vote for or with the cohort that may look more. Well, does Cricket South Africa want to remain a member, or do they want to be suspended, like it would appear Zimbabwe cricket wanted to happen, to try and get them out of their situation with the government? So that brings another layer of complexity to it all, which looks like it's all going to be done by December. But yeah.
There's so many variables. It's like getting to the season finale of House of Cards or something. There's just so many of these political balls up in the air, and no one really knows where they're going to land. And it's a bit sad that we've spent half an hour talking about administration, but I find it fascinating.
It could be a very important vote, though.
Oh, absolutely, and great to House of Cards. Didn't that end well?
Yeah.
This is one thing that has been bothering me since the female independent director was announced. Just since we're on the topic and getting things off our chest.
What colour's the couch, Nick?
Exactly, the couch. It's like, I like it better when you guys have a guest on, because you don't talk as much.
Because Indra Nooyi, when she was appointed, was the CEO of Pepsi, who at the time was a major sponsor of the ICC. So I found it quite interesting that they basically gave their sponsor a vote on the board. Obviously, she's not at Pepsi anymore, and Pepsi's not a sponsor anymore. But yeah, that appointment was quite interesting.
But her vote is behind Imran Khawaja. No, but it was, look, strong, successful female in that position was great. But yeah, it's a fair point as to the level of independence. It sounds like she's been amazing on the board, though, in terms of bringing conversations back that have gone off track, or at least focusing. So,
well, we should get her on this podcast.
Well, yes.
As Nick interrupts Tim.
Yeah, well.
As Tim said, they're looking to get all of this sorted by the end of the year. And yeah, as we said before, on top of all the other stuff that we're covering here at Emerging Cricket, we'll keep an eye on that for you as well. To Hong Kong, your old stomping ground, Tim. Cricket's back. They're training outdoors. The national men's team have started training outdoors again in the wake of everything going on in these uncertain times. If I hear that one more time from anyone else, then I'll probably kill them. And
Drink.
Yeah, exactly. The unprecedented drinking game.
I'm guilty for doing it right now, but the Women's Premier League, it's just a 2-team setup there. That's back as well. And on the men's side, there's action as well. Nick, you've been watching a little bit of that stream. What have you made of that?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, this Women's Premier League thing. The idea is to basically have an extra level between the women's club tournament and the national team, and they've done that pretty effectively. A lot of national team stars divvied up across the two teams. The Jade Jets were the winners on the day, beating the Bauhinia Stars. But one person I was quite interested in was Pool 2 or Pool Toe. Sorry, maybe you know how that's pronounced, Tim. But yeah, batted quite well for the Jets. Very solid. Stuck around, scored 50, led them to and ultimately a winning total. And of course, Betty Chan, national team bowler, wrecked the Stars top order, and Jasmine Eve Titmus gave some good support as well. Maybe you could tell us about a few of these players, Tim, if you know a bit about them.
Paul Toe's played for Hong Kong I've been in and out in the squad the sort of last few years for Hong Kong Cricket Club. Betty Chan, of course, great off spinner. Lots of wickets for Hong Kong. But Jazz Titmus is an interesting story. Came over to coach for Hong Kong Cricket Club after being captain, I think, of Lancashire. After a couple of years, left her coaching role and is now a recruiter and is very much in love, and back playing cricket again, which is great news because Jazz has also qualified for Hong Kong and has made her T20I debut. Men's wise as well, new recruits, as again a new arrival for Hong Kong Cricket Club, Martin Coetzee, by all accounts, world beater. And I'm guessing Hong Kong's hoping he hangs around for a number of years to get available. But at the moment, it's just playing domestic stuff. Yeah, they beat Ehsan Khan's Diaskwa and Little Saiwan. So Little Saiwan, great story. Don't have a ground, but the biggest club by participants in Hong Kong, but was started by spies, by the spooks many, many years ago in Hong Kong. All the, government workers that, had faceless jobs.
I work in import.
Yeah, exactly. That's I work in marine insurance and work in cricket in Hong Kong.
That explains a lot.
And Azaz Khan, like the great, opens the bowling, opens the batting, and captains Kowloon. And they won as well. But I tell you what, it's great being able to watch this stuff on being streamed after sort of all those years playing there. And there's a bit of argy-bargy as well. I saw one wicket and send-off from a former national player of Hong Kong who's now training to become a pilot, giving someone a bit of a send-off and getting the old lightsaber pointed at him as the batter departed.
Oh, wicket-keepers, eh?
But yeah, and the national team back to training on Tuesday. Saw Trent Johnston posting some Instagram videos there, training at Mission Road, Ting Kwong Road Recreation Ground, of course, where the Blitz was held and the only accredited venue. So they had centre wicket sessions and fielding going on with groups of 4. Bez, I hope I'm doing enough talking for you here while you're resting that little throat of yours.
Maybe you can do a bit more, Tim. Tell me about Ehsan Khan's batting, because last time he played in Hong Kong, he smashed a century for Diaskwa, and this time he's I think it was about 35 off 10 balls or something ridiculous. But I've never seen him really produce it for the national team. What's going on? Is it just in his head, or is it shorter boundaries in Hong Kong, or something else?
Well, short boundaries in Hong Kong. I think we heard Anchi talk about that, the sort of 45-metre boundaries at Hong Kong Cricket Club, and the challenge that brings as a spinner, but that's another conversation. I think he's probably someone that has struggled to find his level up from club cricket, or when at least he's given that kind of ownership role up the order. I've thought about this a number of times, thinking, could he bat higher in that Hong Kong team? Because he bats so low, inevitably, it's almost a free wicket if he bats higher. But the problem has been, as the Hong Kong team has changed with certain players not being available or dropping out or moving away, they probably can't afford to take him out of the lower order because they need him as almost insurance down there to try and rebuild innings. But I just, find that I think he's someone that probably needs a bit of flair at the top of the innings. So who knows? We know Trent Johnston's listening here. Give Khan a go. But of course, now that Scott no longer plays, Scott McKechnie doesn't play for Hong Kong, it'll be fine. They won't be running each other out and then having fights. But Ehsan's really good overall player. I think he's probably, his cricket age might be a little bit below par. I mean, he's probably nudging 40 now. And what he's brought to the team with the ball, I think Hong Kong will be in a much worse place. But you never know, there might be potential there with him at the bat, especially as they're bringing in so many young Hong Kong developed kids through the system who can get a chance batting higher in the order. Having someone like that who has that experience at the top, who knows? Maybe that's an option.
Sticking in Asia, and we've seen the Lanka Premier League and a few emerging players have been picked up in that competition, not only from associate members, but recent full members as well. Sunam Gautam, who we profiled on Emerging Cricket through his name in the ring, unfortunately didn't get picked up, but a few notable names that did. Paul Sterling of Ireland, Hazratullah Zazai of Afghanistan, as well as Naveen Al-Haq, and Ravi Singh, the Canadian, loves bludgeoning everything. Nick, I'll start with you there as a Canadian who's seen plenty of Ravi Singh. That's a great pickup, and it looks like someone watched the T20 World Cup qualifier, which is good.
Yeah, well, you'd think maybe they watched all of the games leading up to the T20 World Cup qualifier, because he didn't quite produce it in the tournament. But even with a slightly lean patch over those few games, he hits a 6 off 12% of his deliveries in T20 cricket for Canada, which,
great stat.
Just for context, Andre Russell hits 13% of his deliveries for 6, and Chris Gale hits 10.8% of his deliveries for 6. So it's a pretty good ratio. Obviously, it's a much smaller sample size than those two guys who are in basically every T20 league ever, including this one for Russell. But yeah, Ravi also did a job in the Qatar T10 with the most sixes for his team, although that tournament is a bit of a, it's under investigation for corruption, so we might not necessarily put too much stock in it. But yeah, I think Singh is the kind of guy that you want in T20, because he doesn't waste too much time, which is one of the big things in analytics and data these days is, do you waste time trying to get in and whatever. He either gets in and hits a bunch of sixes or he gets out. So I think he'll be a great pick.
Yeah, someone who doesn't waste their time is Hazratullah Zazai. Every time I've seen him bat, he's swung from the hip basically every opportunity. 12% of his balls going for 6, so that's about 1 every 8 deliveries or so. So that's
pretty handy.
Phenomenal. Yeah, good to see Paul Sterling get picked up. And I think that one of the, not necessarily a complaint, because at this level and even at full member level, we saw him perform quite well against England as well. But I think one slight criticism we've had on Sterling is that if anything, he probably goes a little bit too hard. And when he actually builds himself into his innings, he actually is much more effective. So you kind of want him to burn 5 or 10 deliveries at the start if it means that he gets going at the end. I know that's a little bit different to the modus operandi of the likes of Hazratullah and Ravi Singh, but I think in his situation that does work a little bit better. If anything, he goes too hard too early, but yeah, once he does get going, as we've seen a lot, he's pretty difficult to stop, and he's done it at just about every level of the game, and he's got a good record in county cricket as well, and he's played in Nepal where the pitches are really slow in the Everest Premier League. So in terms of Sri Lanka and everything there, I don't think it'll be too foreign to him. I'm not sure how much cricket he's played in Sri Lanka at all, but he's played in very similar conditions in franchise tournaments previously. So I'm really excited to see how he goes. Naveen Al-Haq is an interesting one. Having a brief little study on him and going back and watching some of that Under-19 World Cup footage in 2018, a very front-on action. He gets that arm really high, which will be quite menacing. I don't know how he'll extract as much bounce in say Sri Lanka, but he pushes them through at probably 135 plus Ks. It'd be interesting to see how he goes. But again, just another Afghan player off the conveyor belt and thrown into franchise cricket. We've seen them everywhere. Unfortunately, Mohammad Nabi hasn't really been given much of a go in the IPL, but Tim, just to finish off here, the Afghans in franchise cricket are everywhere, and we've seen them in just about every league now.
Yeah, especially the spinners, and we talk about kind of picking an all-spin attack. Afghanistan's going to be close to doing that in a T20I, I think, with their stock, and I think they're probably more famous for their franchise cricketers, and I think that's the new wave of the new full members. Let's call them a newer nation than Ireland. Their rise since the early 2000s is meteoric, to say that the least. Could almost say it's unprecedented. You talk about Mohammad Nabi, geez, I tell you what, I think we said it a couple of weeks ago, we can make a pretty good team of players that haven't got off the bench in this IPL. And I don't know what that tells me. Does that say it's that they should have another team, or they shouldn't have so many overseas players? Because the fact is they can afford to pay these overseas players to be there, I guess, and be part of it. But, are we seeing the best crop of Indian players, or could there be other ones that could make up another team? Because there are definitely enough good international players out there, and you've got the likes of Mo Nabi, who's been so good for the Sunrisers, sitting on that bench, and I believe there might be a leg spinner from Nepal there, Daniel. I haven't heard you talk about it much. Again,
why do you hate Sandeep?
Two great leg spinners, Tahir and Lamachani, coming from the CPL, where they I don't know if dominated is the right word, but on the wickets there that were conducive to their style of bowling, to now be bench warmers. It's interesting, but yeah, to your point, Afghanistan have players, kind of like we said, new age cricketers. They've cut their teeth on the global franchise circuit, but also, which is good in the context of a West Indies and the struggles they've had. They've then been able to go and play for Afghanistan. They got them to a World Cup, and what a story that was to get through that qualifier. But it'd be interesting as time goes on to see how their skills sort of focus and whether they become a very T20 oriented nation, and if their 50 over cricket falls apart. But we've got to remember as well, they play all three formats across Afghanistan in first class cricket. Still play a lot of red ball cricket, so they definitely seem to be striving to get better at Test cricket. But we all know how much Test cricket costs to put on, and we've seen the stories of Ireland, and I'm sure Afghanistan, despite getting the help they've got from India to be able to host over there, it's still not cheap.
Well, yeah, and Rashid Khan has a Test match 10-wicket haul, so I mean, just from a spectator's point of view, it'd be a bit of a shame not to see guys like him playing their trade in what I still think is the best format of the game. And just going back to the point about Paul Sterling, I've dug up a stat from Tim Wigmore, one of our favourites. He points out in 71 ODIs until the end of 2016, Sterling averaged 32.9 with a strike rate of 92. But since the start of 2017, Sterling is averaging 42.7 at a strike rate of 80. So basically, he's gone down 10 points in his strike rate and gone up 10 points in his average. So he's scoring a lot more runs, been a lot more consistent for Ireland. And of course, that stat came out just before he smashed England to all corners and helped Ireland beat them. So, yeah, I think that's quite interesting that you raised that about him being perhaps, could perhaps make the case that he was a bit irresponsible in the early part of his career, and he's sort of maturing as a player and becoming that more reliable at the top of the order, getting them off to a more reliable start. So, yeah.
To wrap some news to finish up today, and first to Romania, who have taken out the Balkan Cup, defeating Bulgaria 4-1 at the Mara Vlasier. Marian Gerasim also broke a world record by becoming the youngest player to play in a men's T20 international at 14 years and 6 days. He claimed figures of 1 for 22 off 3 overs in his second appearance of the series. And the ICC Americas qualifiers has now been extended to include Argentina and Brazil. Elsewhere, Bhutan and Myanmar will be making their debut in Asian region qualifiers. That's everything in the Emerging Game this week. Subscribe to the Emerging Cricket Podcast if you haven't done so already, so you can tune in as soon as it drops. Pass the pod around and make sure to give us a 5-star review. If you want to support us financially, go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/emergingcricket, where you can support us from as little as $2 US a month. For now, on behalf of Nick Skinner, Tim Cutler, and myself, Daniel Beswick, see you next week.
Yeah!